On October the 30th, Quebec became the first Canadian province to allow consideration of advance requests for medical assistance in dying in cases where a person's condition, maybe they have Alzheimer's, might render them incapable of giving consent at a later date. That is, generally speaking, illegal under current federal law. But on October 24th, Federal Health Minister Mark said Ottawa would not be contesting Quebec's law that allows those advance requests for MAID. Instead, the federal government will launch a countrywide consultation on the issue next month, with a report to be published in March 2025. So on today's call-in, we want to hear what Manitobans think about advance directives like those now allowed in Quebec. Right now in Manitoba, consent to MAID usually must be given immediately before the procedure. With an advance directive, that would not necessarily be required. It could depend on specific circumstances, and death would take place perhaps months or even years in the future. So what do you think? Are advance directives like those now being allowed in Quebec a good idea or a bad idea? And should laws around MAID respect individual choice? Do you question the move to advance directives based on your concerns about the availability of palliative care? And what does the latest research say about who's accessing MAID? Do you know someone who chose MAID or decided against it? Please share your comments, concerns, and questions by calling me 204-780-0893. That's a lot of talk to get to the point that we are talking today with guest Dorothy Stevens. She is a retired registered nurse and current co-chair of the Winnipeg chapter of the national human rights charity Dying with Dignity. Their stated mission is ensuring access to quality end-of-life choice and care through advocacy, education, and support. Hi, Dorothy.
Hi.
At last, you get a word in edgewise. So tell me, in Manitoba, how do advance directives work right now?
So there's a difference between advance directives and advance requests for MAID. So I just want to clarify that terminology right off the bat, because in Manitoba, an advance directive, that's a general term for a document where you express your wishes for future health care. That's got nothing to do with MAID.
Right.
In Manitoba, we usually call it a healthcare directive, but advance directive is kind of a general term that would be used across the country. And those are provincial, and they are not related to MAID, and the MAID law is federal. So what you're talking about today, what we're talking about today, is advance requests for MAID, which is would be a completely different document and completely different request.
Yeah, because I think an advance care directive would be like, do not resuscitate,
yes.
I don't want ICU. It's
yes.
for things you don't want, but it's
things you do want. So
but it's
there's
not...
also a misconception that advance directives are only for people who say, well, I don't want anything done and don't keep me alive with tubes. But the idea of a healthcare directive is to express your wishes for a future care for some kind of illness or emergency, not just end-of-life care.
Yeah.
And it can, if your wishes or beliefs or opinions or values are that you would want everything done, then that's what you should put in it. It's not just for people who want to refuse care.
Right. Okay. So we are going to go straight to our callers, but give us a call. And Dorothy is here, of course, to clarify what is and what isn't going on in the world of advance directives. And also, I would say, point out that everyone should have healthcare directives, because it's not necessarily about what you don't want. It could be about what you do want when it comes to end-of-life care. Do give us a call, 204-780-0893. And we're going to go to Bob on the line. Hi, Bob.
Yes, good afternoon. I want to express my dismay at the federal government's process on this whole issue. It's been studied and it's been done to death. And I would hope that both the Manitoba government and, in fact, every provincial government in the country should thumb its nose at the federal government and do exactly what the Quebec government has done.
And why? You seem to feel strongly about that. What are you basing your opinions on?
Well, I'm basing it on my own hope that I can at some point, make an advance directive for MAID when I need it. And I can't do that now, and I believe the Supreme Court threw it back to the federal government a few years ago. And I'm pretty disgusted with the federal government, well, not going along with the Supreme Court decision.
So Bob is correct on that. There have already been a number of studies and reviews and recommendations going back to when MAID was first legalized, and certainly after the last legislative update, and the committee that reviewed it all have made recommendations that advance requests for MAID should be legal, and the polls certainly support that. The majority of Canadians, including the majority of Manitobans, do support that.
So there has been quite a lot of research.
There's been lots of studies, interviews, panels, discussions, recommendations, and the last recommendation certainly was that it should be legal. So, I mean, at least the federal government is not saying no, but we're not real sure why they need to review it again either.
All right. So just to get back to the idea of, so how many people, do you have a number, like 50% of people want support having advance directives?
Oh, no, it's
80%?
way more than that.
Oh, it is.
It's more like around 80. Or 80-ish, depending on the province.
And I see that number supported by an Ipsos Reid poll that was, of course, commissioned by your organization, but at 82%. You are listening to Radio Noon. We're talking about advance directives for accessing MAID. Quebec has recently changed their rules around that, and the federal government has said they will not interfere with that. Give us a call, 204-780-0893, and let us know your thoughts. We're going to go to the phone lines. We have Janine. Hello, Janine.
Yes.
What would you like to say?
I have watched a family member spend 5 years in palliative care, and we began the MAID process when she first went into palliative care, and there were so many hoops to jump through that by the time they finally got around to possibly accepting her request, she was no longer communicative and able to pass a cognitive test in order to actually carry out the procedure. So now we're 5 years in, watching her lie in a bed day in and day out, not being able to communicate, being so drugged up on painkillers to try and keep her comfortable, and it's just heartbreaking. So I, right now, wish I lived in Quebec.
Yes. And do you know, Janine, what this person would have wanted? Did they leave anything while they were still able to do so, like any instructions or opinions?
Absolutely. My mom's biggest fear was that she was going to end up in a personal care home, and she said from a very early age of her early 60s that was a wish that she never, ever wanted to have happen. She watched my grandparents go through living in personal care homes, and while the care home she is in is absolutely wonderful and very good to their residents, it's just not a place she ever desired to be. My mom was always extremely active and did everything for everyone in the community, and now she has no quality of life whatsoever.
Yes, and this is something I'm hearing a lot of as a baby boomer myself. A lot of people around my age are witnessing the deaths of parents or possibly aunts or uncles that are going through a horrendous experience similar to what Janine has described, and I went through it with my own mother as well, who died in a personal care home after years of Alzheimer's. And that's why I think there's so much support right now for the issue of advance requests, because a lot of us who have lived that with relatives or even friends are saying that we would not want that for ourselves. And we're looking ahead and saying, if this happened to me, I would want. But the problem is that you can't make a request that far into the future. Even with the Quebec law that they are proposing, you still need a diagnosis. So, for instance, I can't say if I get Alzheimer's, then at a certain stage I would want this or that. I would have to already be diagnosed with Alzheimer's. And in the early stages, while I'm still competent, I could then make that advance request. And that's like what Quebec is looking at.
Well, thank you, Janine, very much for sharing your story.
Thank you.
And we hope other people will too. And give us your opinions, your comments, your questions about this very interesting and sometimes divisive topic. 204-780-0893. Today we're talking about advance directives when it comes to accessing medical assistance in death. As I mentioned before, Quebec has proposed changing their law and allowing advance directives, and the federal government says that they will make no move to stop it. Dorothy, I wanted to ask you, I've often heard it said that if there was enough palliative care, if there were more resources, if people were more sensitive about palliative care, there would be no need for MAID.
No.
What do you say about that?
No, that's not true. That was especially a big fear early on when MAID was first becoming legalized. And in fact, a lot of people working in palliative care, physicians and nurses, felt I'm gonna say like maybe insecure. I think they felt that if somebody wanted MAID, they must not be doing a good enough job as a doctor or as a nurse in making that person comfortable, and so they were seeing MAID as a failure. But that's not how it's proved at all. The majority of people who are requesting MAID and having MAID already have palliative care or have access to palliative care. It's not an either or. They're absolutely compatible. In fact, the majority of people who are having MAID a lot of them are even already on a palliative care unit. And the reason they're requesting MAID is because it's not about the quality of palliative care or whether or not the doctors and nurses can keep you comfortable. It's really about autonomy and control. A lot of the people who are wanting MAID, it's because they want to die on their own terms. They don't want to go to the bitter end. They don't want to live through the kind of death that they saw somebody else have. They want to control their own destiny.
And how many people, do you have any numbers on this, have actually used medical assistance in dying?
Lots. So I did look up some numbers, and I found that last year in Manitoba alone, there were 366 applications for MAID. Only 236 of those actually took place. And the reason for that, and it's important to note, is because just because you apply doesn't mean you have to go through with it. You're not signing your death warrant when you apply. You can apply if you think you might want it. And then you can decide later once you're approved. So about 100 people either died before ever having it or changed their minds. But 236 actually went through with it. In 2022, it was 223. And that's the trend across the country, is that since it was legalized, the numbers have been climbing fairly steadily. There's the last full statistics were in 2022. For Manitoba, there have been over 1,000 Manitobans as of the end of 2022 who have actually had MAID, and it's about 4% of deaths across the country now. Even higher, I think the highest is BC, and it's like 6 or 7% there. And the reason for that is most commonly believed that because there's a lot of educated people who retire there, and so they have a well-versed, well-read people who follow this stuff and then would want it. Yeah.
Well, it's been raised also that people in marginalized communities might be pressured into choosing MAID rather than being cared for by an overburdened public system. What do you think of that concern?
So is there an overburdened public system? Yes. There, long before MAID was legalized, there have been people with serious illnesses and disabilities who have been underserviced by the healthcare system and who have been living, in some cases, I would say even a miserable existence with substandard housing and home care and all the rest of it. What MAID legislation has done has bring that to light. Because these people didn't get any news coverage before. They just existed, and in a lot of cases were just trapped in that scenario. And now that some of them are saying, my life in this system is so bad that I would choose MAID, that's what's making the news. And it is very sad. And yes, there need to be more supports for those people with disabilities and who are marginalized and all the rest of it. And in some ways, it's maybe good that this is now coming to light. But it's really two separate issues here. One is, do they meet the criteria for MAID? Because if they have the serious, illness and suffering and all the rest of it, if they meet the criteria, well, then they meet the criteria. The other system needs to be addressed at the healthcare, the social supports and stuff like that.
Please join our conversation. Give us a call at 204-780-0893, or you can text us at 204-588-7355. And it's also been argued that being able, with an advance directive, to choose a set of circumstances, if not a date in the future, you don't have all the data at the time, that what you think you might want might not be true at the time. And if you're no longer able to make a cognizant decision, you might not be suffering by then. There might be future treatments, and it won't be you making the decisions. And also, I've heard this for the doctors themselves. You say when you don't know your loved ones, you want MAID, and they come to see you in the nursing home, and you're sitting in a sunbeam happily, doing a puzzle or something.
I've heard that too.
And what's your response to that?
So this is a good case for having discussions with your family and your friends and your loved ones, and thinking not just about MAID, but the whole broader issue of advanced care planning for your future health. The most important thing to convey is your wishes, beliefs, and values, and what you consider an acceptable quality of life. Never mind the medicalese. You don't need a bunch of diagnosis and talking about tubes and everything, because none of us knows what's going to happen in the future. Whether it's a terminal illness or something else, none of us can predict that we won't be in a car accident tomorrow and end up with a head injury or in a coma or something. So you should be thinking about this kind of thing in terms of advanced care planning, and not just waiting for the issue of MAID to come up. And one of the most tragic things is when somebody is seriously ill or dying in the hospital and the family has no idea what they would want. And they have nothing written down, or maybe siblings are arguing about whether or not to pull the plug or to keep the treatment going and stuff like that. So you need to have those conversations and indicate your wishes and values clearly, and describe what you consider to be an acceptable quality of life. If I'm ever sitting in a nursing home with Alzheimer's, and you find me sitting in front of the TV smiling and say, well, she looks pretty happy. Okay. But to me, if I'm sitting in front of that TV and there's rap music playing on that TV or sports, and I'm still smiling, that's not me, because I'm not a sports fan, and nor do I like rap. So just because somebody is smiling doesn't mean that's what, I would not consider that an acceptable quality of life. And those are the kind of values and descriptions that you need to provide and
put out
discuss
there.
And put out
so
there.
that people know. We're going to return to the phone lines, and we've just got a few minutes left. Hello. We've got Orion on the phone. Or Orion?
Orion, hi.
Hi, Orion.
How are you?
Fine. How are you?
I'm good. I wanted to say my father chose to die via MAID in 2020. And we had talked about MAID many times before, and one of his biggest concerns was developing dementia and wanting to have an advance, I'll just call it an advance directive. I'm sorry about the other term. But it really was really upsetting to him that wasn't an option, because he didn't want a really, really diminished quality of life that he might have with dementia. And also because my mother died of dementia, and what happened in the end with her is she just stopped eating. She reached a certain point of diminishment where she just refused to eat and refused to drink. And the nurses at the time told me this wasn't that uncommon. She'd reached this point, it was the last decision she could make. And I really felt my mother didn't want to go on the way she was. And I think she worried that the next step, she wouldn't have any choices at all. She wouldn't be able to know she had a choice, in a sense. And then my father certainly knew that. And, I think, we don't really know what comes all with dementia, but we do know what people can forecast is what they want in their quality of life. And my dad was really clear, and he was really clear when he did make the decision for his life.
Yes. So having lived through that, then have you thought about your own wishes, and have you done any kind of advanced care planning yourself?
I have done some advanced care planning around, what I want. Obviously, if something,
Yes.
terrible happened, but you've given me food for thought about more to think about.
Yeah.
But I live with a chronic illness, and I'm in pain every day, and that's just not a great time, I've got to tell you.
Yeah.
And
Okay.
it's, there's a lot of diminishment, and, I don't know, there might be someday down the line where that might be a choice that I want to have available to me.
Okay.
So I definitely have thought about it. It's certainly not something I feel the need to have access to now.
Yeah. If
But,
you're thinking about it, then this is probably a good time to put a plug in for the Dying with Dignity website. It is a national website, but we do have a Winnipeg chapter page, and there are a number of chapters across the country that all have information. There's all kinds of information and resources on there, not just about medical assistance in dying, but whole packages of information on advanced care planning, including all kinds of little quizzes that you can do to think about your values and what you might want or not want, and information and resources. And for people who are listening who are thinking that they would support advance requests for MAID, which, as I said, is not the same thing as advanced care planning, but if you are a person who supports advance requests for MAID becoming legal, if you look on the website under where it says advocacy, there is a letter writing campaign to let your members of parliament know that you would support that.
And thank you, Orion, for sharing your story. It's good to hear these points of view, and also, as you say, it's plenty of food for thought.
Yeah.
And
Could I add one more point?
sure, we're just running out of time, but absolutely, you may.
At one point, my father thought he had lost his access to MAID, which he hadn't, but he ended up thinking through taking his life in other ways, and he landed in a hospital. I remember talking to a psychiatrist who was quite worried, and he said that a lot of men, particularly, do this because they want to have control over their death. And I just thought that was just a terrible thing.
Yeah.
Because the thought of, finding my father or someone finding my father in his house dead was far worse than MAID.
Well, thank you, Orion, and even more to think about, and it also points out the value of education. And so thank you very much, Dorothy Stevens, for being our guest today. Dorothy Stevens is a retired registered nurse and current co-chair of the Winnipeg chapter of the national human rights charity, Dying with Dignity.